The notification lit up my phone at 7:41 on a Sunday morning, right as the first sunlight spilled through my kitchen window. I was halfway through my first sip of coffee when I saw the headline engagement announcement, Megan Pierce and Daniel Hayes. For a heartbeat, the world blurred. My thumb hovered over the screen. The picture loaded slowly, a photo of Megan's hand resting on Daniel's chest, that same diamond ring glinting under the morning light. My ring, the one he'd designed for me last winter. The caption read, "When love finds you where it truly belongs." My stomach dropped so fast I thought I'd be sick. I scrolled down, hundreds of comments already flooding in. "You two are perfect. Some things are just meant to be." Then one that burned, I heard he was her sister's ex. Guess she won. My phone buzzed again. Mom's name flashed across the screen. I answered before I could think. "Sweetheart," she began softly, "I wanted you to hear from me first." I stared at the photo still glowing on my phone. "You knew there was a pause. Just a few weeks. Megan didn't mean to hurt you. These things happen, honey." I couldn't breathe. "You mean my fiancé fell in love with my sister, and you're okay with that?" Her voice tightened. "Don't make this into a scene. You'll find your own happiness soon. Try not to be jealous." I hung up before I said something I couldn't take back. My hand trembled, coffee sloshing over the counter. The phone screen dimmed, but the image burned into my eyes. She stole him, and they called me jealous. I sat there for a long time, the house too quiet, the clock ticking loud enough to drown my thoughts. Denial came first, that fragile, stupid hope that maybe it was a joke or a misunderstanding. But Megan's smile in the photo was the kind she saved for trophies, chin-tilted eyes glowing, like she'd won something I'd wanted. I tried to work, opening my laptop to edit photos from a recent wedding shoot. I was a wedding planner and photographer. Irony had a cruel sense of humor. The bride on my screen beamed in lace and sunlight, her joy so radiant it almost hurt to look at. My fingers hovered over the keyboard, but all I saw was Daniel standing next to Megan in that photo, their hands intertwined. The cursor blinked, waiting. I couldn't make beauty out of lies anymore. Outside, Charleston's summer air pressed against the windows, heavy and sticky. I thought of the night Daniel had told me he couldn't wait to marry me, the way his voice softened when he said my name. "You're the calm I never knew I needed," he'd whispered. Now I wondered how many times he'd said the same to her. By noon, my phone was still buzzing. Friends texted awkward condolences. "Did you see the post? Are you okay?" I didn't answer any of them. What was I supposed to say? That the man I loved had swapped fiancés like it was a scheduling error, and my own mother was cheering from the sidelines? When the silence became unbearable, I drove to Mom's house. She lived on the edge of town in the same white clapboard home we'd grown up in. Her hydrangeas bloomed like nothing bad ever happened there. She opened the door before I knocked, already shaking her head. "Lauren, please, don't do this. Do what I asked. Start drama. Megan's finally happy. Don't ruin it with resentment." I laughed, an ugly sound, sharp and hollow. Resentment. She took my fiancé, Mom. She didn't take him. Love isn't a possession. "No," I said, voice trembling, "but loyalty is." Her expression hardened. "You've always been so emotional. Your sister just connects with people more easily. You could learn from that." I stared at her, realizing she truly believed it. That somehow this betrayal was my fault for not being lovable enough. "You taught me to be kind," I said quietly. But all that did was make me easy to betray. The kitchen smelled like cinnamon, like childhood breakfasts that now felt counterfeit. I wanted to scream, to break something, but instead I whispered, "Does Dad know she looked away? He doesn't need the details. He just wants peace in the family. Peace." That word again, the one she used to sweep every wound under the rug. "Peace built on silence isn't peace," I said. "It's surrender." Her lips pressed thin. "Lauren, don't embarrass yourself." That was her final line always. I'd spent my life obeying it. I left before the tears came. The air outside was thick, the sun too bright. I sat in my car, hands gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles went white. Across the street, the church bell rang, marking the hour. I thought of Megan trying on wedding gowns, of Mom fussing with her hair, of Daniel pretending this was destiny. And for the first time, anger began to replace heartbreak. That night, I walked through my apartment like a stranger. The walls were lined with wedding photographs, couples I'd captured at their happiest. I stopped at one picture, a bride laughing as her groom kissed her hand, the light golden and warm. I used to think love looked like that perfect, delicate, immortal. Now I saw the truth. Love could rot in plain sight and still smile for the camera. I poured myself a glass of wine and sat on the floor beside my desk. The engagement ring was still in its velvet box, tucked behind my files. I pulled it out, the diamond catching the faint city light. It was beautiful and meaningless, just like every promise he'd made. For a moment, I imagined mailing it back to them with a note, "You forgot something." But no, that would be giving them attention, and I was done performing for people who mistook my grace for weakness. Still, as I turned the ring over in my hand, I couldn't ignore the quiet thought that crept in. Maybe she hadn't just taken him. Maybe she'd taken every piece of me I'd ever given away too freely. The laughter, the trust, the softness. She'd always had a talent for that. When we were kids, Megan used to steal the front seat on every car ride. She'd flash that same disarming smile, and Mom would tell me to stop making a fuss. "You're older," she'd say. "Let her have it." And I always did. That habit of stepping aside had followed me into adulthood, into love, into every room where I should have stood my ground. Maybe that was ending tonight. I opened my wedding planning binder, the one filled with color swatches, flower samples, seating charts, all for a future that no longer existed. The cover was pale blue, embossed with gold letters, "The Perfect Day." I ran my fingers over the title, then slowly closed it until the pages bent under my palm. My breath came steady now, my pulse calm. The pain had settled into something colder, clearer. On my desk sat a small framed photo of Megan and me from Christmas years ago. She had her arm around me, grinning at the camera. I looked like I was holding my breath. I took it down, turned it face down, and set the glass frame aside. By midnight, the city outside was silent, except for the hum of distant traffic. I stood by the window, looking at the glow of downtown lights. Somewhere out there, Megan was probably toasting her engagement. Mom was bragging to her friends, and Daniel was sleeping next to someone who thought betrayal counted as passion. I whispered into the glass, my reflection pale and still. "You knew, both of you. And you did it anyway." Then I turned away, finished my wine, and started cleaning the mess on the counter, the spilled coffee, the crumbs, the evidence of that morning's shock. It felt symbolic, erasing the chaos, leaving only the quiet. As I wiped the counter dry, my gaze landed on my camera sitting near the window. Its lens glimmered faintly under the city glow. That was when the thought came, sharp and certain. If truth was what they called jealousy, maybe it was time I let it show. I set the camera upright, adjusted the focus, and whispered, "Let's capture something real for once." The words sounded steady, almost serene. I didn't yet know what they meant or where they would lead. But for the first time in months, I wasn't shaking. I turned off the lights, left the binder closed on the table, and watched the reflection of my city shimmer against the window. The skyline looked different tonight, darker, yes, but also honest. And that for now was enough. The next morning, sunlight leaked through the blinds like it didn't care what had broken the night before. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, convincing myself I was fine. People lose love all the time, I told myself. Maybe Daniel just wasn't meant for me. But when I reached for my phone, the screen glowed with a new message. "You're invited to celebrate the engagement of Megan Pierce and Daniel Hayes." The email was cheerful, lined with gold script, a photo of them laughing on a beach. My throat tightened. The date, September 18th. My date. The same weekend Daniel and I had booked at Magnolia Estate before everything fell apart. Even the venue was the same. I whispered to the empty room. It wasn't a coincidence. It was choreography. The denial cracked right there. I sat up staring at the inbox like it could apologize. It didn't. It just blinked at me cold and final. I could still hear his voice in my head, calm, steady, reassuring, you and me forever. 3 months earlier, he'd said that exact line while I was arranging peonies for a client's wedding. He'd brought me lunch, kissed my cheek, promised he'd never met anyone as loyal. 2 weeks later, he started working late, canceling dinners, silencing his phone. I'd asked if something was wrong. He said, "Just tired," and I'd believed him. Back then, Megan had started showing up at my studio almost daily. She claimed she wanted to learn about the business, said she admired how I balanced creativity and order. But her questions were never about lighting or contracts. They were about Daniel. What he liked, what we argued about, what gifts made him smile. I thought she was trying to bond. Now I knew she was collecting information. One Friday, I caught them laughing in the kitchen during a family barbecue. Megan's hand brushed his arm, his smile too long to be innocent. When I asked later what they were talking about, Daniel said she was helping me practice what to say in my vows. He grinned. "Your sister's funny." The next morning, his phone had a new passcode. I didn't ask why. That was what I thought trust looked like, pretending not to notice. Now, months later, I sat on the edge of my bed replaying that night like a movie I couldn't turn off. I wanted to believe they hadn't meant to hurt me, that it had just happened. But betrayal never just happens. It's built one small choice at a time. By afternoon, I drove back to Mom's house. Her kitchen still smelled like vanilla candles and lemon cleaner, too tidy to hold any truth. She looked up from her coffee when I walked in. "Lauren," she sighed, as if I were the problem she needed to fix. "I saw the invitation," I said. She nodded slowly. "I figured you would. They're getting married at Magnolia." Her tone was careful, practiced. "You don't own Magnolia Estate, honey. It's a lovely place. Don't let it ruin your peace." My laugh came out sharp. "Peace? She's marrying my fiancé, Mom. That's not peace, that's theft." Her smile didn't reach her eyes. "No one stole anything. Sometimes love changes. Maybe you should learn to accept that." "What I should learn," I said, "is how to stop being everyone's scapegoat." She frowned. "You sound bitter." "Maybe because every time she crosses a line, you hand her a reason." Her voice turned cold. "You always overreact. Megan didn't mean any harm." I stared at her across the table, the same woman who used to tell me not to make a fuss when Megan broke my toys, took my clothes, my space, my praise. "You've been saying that since we were kids." She didn't mean it. "Maybe she did, Mom. Maybe she always did." Her mouth tightened. "Don't embarrass yourself again, Lauren." There it was, the family anthem. Don't embarrass yourself. Don't embarrass us. Hide your anger, hide your pain, hide anything that makes people uncomfortable. I'd spent 33 years following that rule, and it had led me right here alone, invisible, replaceable. I stood up. "You should be embarrassed, not me." Her eyes flashed with something that looked like guilt, then disappeared. "I think you should go." I was planning on it. Outside, the air was thick, with the smell of rain, the sky bruised gray. I drove aimlessly through town until I found myself near the flower shop where Daniel and I had picked out bouquets months ago. The window display still showed pale pink roses and white lilies, our colors. I almost turned away, but then I saw him inside. He looked thinner, tired, his tie-loosened hair disheveled. For a second, he didn't see me. I could have walked away. I should have. Instead, I pushed open the door. The bell chimed. He turned, surprise flickering across his face. "Lauren," he said softly. I nodded. "So it's true," he exhaled, rubbing the back of his neck. "You weren't supposed to find out like that." "How was I supposed to find out, Daniel? An invitation? A press release?" He looked down. "It wasn't planned. Things just happened." I stepped closer. Like a storm or like a theft, his jaw tightened. "It's not that simple. It's exactly that simple," he swallowed. "Megan and I, there's something different with her. She makes me feel alive." I laughed, cold and hollow. And I made you feel safe, right? That's what you tell yourself to sleep at night. He met my eyes, something like shame flickering there. I didn't want to hurt you. You did anyway. We stood there, the scent of flowers choking the air. For a heartbeat, I thought he might apologize. He didn't. He just said, I hope someday you'll understand. Understand what I asked, that this wasn't about you. The words hit harder than I expected. I stepped back, nodding slowly. You're right. It never was. I walked out before the tears came. The sky finally opened up, rain pelting the sidewalk. I didn't run. I let it soak through my clothes, cooling the heat crawling up my neck. Somewhere behind me, a bell chimed again, as Daniel stepped outside, but I didn't turn around. When I got home, the rain still tapping against the windows, I turned on the TV for noise. My breath caught when Megan's face appeared on a local morning show. She was glowing in white silk, talking about her unexpected fairy tale. The host gushed about sisterhood and destiny. Megan laughed, flipping her hair. It's funny how life gives you second chances, she said, eyes sparkling. The audience clapped. The host smiled. Your fiancé's ex-sister must be proud. Megan's smile didn't falter. Lauren's got a big heart. She'll move on. I muted the sound, staring at her frozen grin. I could almost feel her satisfaction through the screen. I walked to the kitchen, grabbed my planner, the one labeled Lauren Pierce Weddings. On the first page was a list of future goals, each one neatly written in blue ink. I took a red pen and drew a line through every single one. Then, on the last blank page, I wrote 3 words in big, steady letters: truth, balance, revenge. The sound of rain softened outside. I set down the pen, staring at those words until they stopped feeling dangerous and started feeling inevitable. Denial had protected me for months, whispering that it wasn't real, that it wasn't as cruel as it looked. But denial was just a cage with prettier walls. I stood by the window watching water streak down the glass city lights, blurring behind it. Somewhere across town, my sister was celebrating her future while pretending the past didn't exist. Mom was probably toasting them, talking about forgiveness, about family unity. Daniel was lying beside Megan, calling her the love of his life. I pressed my hand against the cool glass, my reflection staring back at me, wet hair, tired eyes, calm face. It's over, I whispered. But even as I said it, I knew it wasn't. Something deeper had shifted inside me, something steady and deliberate. I wasn't going to scream or beg or chase them. I was going to do what I did best: plan. Outside, thunder rumbled low and distant. I turned off the lights, letting the city's faint glow fill the room. The storm was moving closer, but this time I wasn't afraid. Denial wasn't saving me anymore. It was only delaying justice. The day after the engagement aired on TV, I woke to a dozen missed calls from unknown numbers. At first I thought it was spam, but then I listened to one voicemail. A woman's voice said, "Hi, I'm from Charleston Daily. We're running a story on Megan and Daniel's engagement and would love a comment from you." I laughed out loud, the sound strange in my quiet apartment. Of course the press would find me. My family had always loved the spotlight, and now I was the shadow behind the glow. The ex-fiancé, the jealous sister, the headline that made their story interesting. I turned off my phone and made coffee. The bitterness tasted familiar, like old habits I couldn't quit. Outside, the sky was soft gray, the kind of weather that made people nostalgic. But nostalgia was dangerous. It made you rewrite the past into something you could survive. I spent the morning organizing my studio. I couldn't stand the clutter anymore, the half-finished floral mock-ups, the photos of couples smiling, the ribbons and lace. Every piece of beauty I'd created felt tainted, now staged and hollow. I tore the sample board down and tossed it into a box. The sound echoed through the empty room. That's when Tessa showed up. She didn't knock, just let herself in, holding 2 coffees and wearing that look that said she already knew too much. "You look like you've been fighting with ghosts," she said, setting the drinks on the counter. "I think the ghosts are winning," I said. She studied me for a moment. You saw the interview. Yeah, twice. She's good on camera, Tessa admitted. Fake as hell but good. I knotted my throat tight. She always was. We sat in silence for a bit. The only sound was the hum of the fridge and the faint buzz of rain outside. Finally, Tessa said, "So what now? You going to confront her?" I shook my head. No. Confronting her gives her a stage. I'm done playing supporting roles in her show. Tessa leaned back. You've got that look again. What look? The one that says, you're about to do something. Quietly, devastating. I almost smiled. Maybe devastation is overdue. She raised an eyebrow. Just promise me whatever you're planning doesn't involve jail time. I took a sip of coffee. No promises. By noon, the rain stopped. I opened the blinds and sunlight spilled across the floor. It caught on the gold frame of a photo me and Megan at her college graduation. She was in the middle, radiant, our parents on either side. I was behind her, half out of frame, holding her flowers. The symbolism wasn't lost on me. I'd spent my entire life standing just outside the picture. That afternoon, I drove to the waterfront. The air smelled of salt and wet pavement. Tourists wandered the boardwalk laughing, buying ice cream. It should have been comforting seeing life go on. Instead, it made the world feel colder. I sat on a bench scrolling through my phone until I landed on Megan's page. Her engagement photos had nearly 50,000 likes. One caption read, "Sometimes love finds you where you least expect it." The comments were full of heart emojis and well wishes. I wondered if Daniel had read them, if he believed all this noise could drown the truth. But deep down I knew it couldn't. Lies have expiration dates. They just look fresh until the air hits them. When I got back home, the answering machine was blinking again. One message, Mom. Lauren, it's me. Please call back. Megan's worried about you. I hit delete without listening to the rest. She wasn't worried. She was curious. She wanted to make sure I wasn't about to embarrass them. I turned on some music, something soft but restless, and started sorting old client files. That's when I found the folder labeled Megan's birthday, 2022. Inside were photos I'd taken at her party, candles, laughter, champagne. Daniel was in some of them too, standing just close enough to raise questions. My stomach twisted. The signs had been there all along. I'd just refused to read them. Around 6, there was a knock on my door. When I opened it, Mom stood there, umbrella dripping rain onto the hallway floor. I called, she said. I saw. She sighed and stepped inside without waiting for an invitation. You look thin. I look like someone whose sister stole her fiancé. Her face tightened. Lauren, please. Don't start with that tone. What tone? The one that makes everything sound like a tragedy. I crossed my arms. You don't think it is? She took a deep breath. I think you're being dramatic. You and Daniel weren't married. Things ended. People move on. People, I repeated slowly, don't move on to their fiancé's sister. She flinched. You don't understand. They're good together. He makes her happy. And she made me miserable. I guess everyone wins. Why do you always see things as competition? She snapped. This isn't about you. That was the moment I realized she truly believed it. In her mind, my pain was an inconvenience, not an injustice. You always protect her, I said, even when she's wrong. Especially when she's wrong. She's fragile, Mom said softly. You're stronger. You always have been. I laughed. That's not strength, Mom. That's neglect with prettier words. For the first time, she looked uncertain. You think I don't love you. I think you love peace more. The silence that followed was heavy enough to suffocate us both. Finally, she picked up her umbrella. You need to let this go. Forgive and move on. I'll move on, I said when I stopped mistaking silence for peace. She didn't reply. The door clicked behind her and I was alone again. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept seeing her face, calm, reasonable, dismissive. It was the same face that used to scold me for crying too loudly when Megan broke my things. The same voice that said, be the bigger person. I'd spent years growing smaller just to fit that mold. At midnight, I got up and made tea. The city outside was quiet, the streetlights reflecting off puddles. I thought about Daniel, about Megan, about how everything they'd built was made of borrowed parts, my plans, my venue, my ring. And then, somewhere between one sip and the next, a strange calm came over me. Not forgiveness, not yet. Something sharper. Clarity. I walked to my desk and opened my laptop. The venue contract was still saved in my files, Magnolia Estate booked under Lauren Pierce. I scrolled through the paperwork, noting the deposit details, the reservation ID, the clause about cancellations. When Megan said she was taking the venue, she'd meant it figuratively. But legally, technically, it was still mine. Every payment, every receipt carried my name. I sat back, heartbeat steady, the idea forming slow and deliberate. They'd taken everything from me without consequence. Maybe it was time they learned what consequences felt like. By 2 a.m, I was still awake. I could hear the faint hum of the refrigerator, the soft patter of rain starting again. The city outside felt smaller, like it was holding its breath. I stared at the folder on my desktop labeled wedding documents. My hand hovered over the mouse. I didn't open it. Not yet. Not tonight. Instead, I whispered to the empty room, "You wanted peace, Mom. You're about to get it, just not the kind you imagined." The words didn't sound angry. They sounded certain. I turned off the lights, leaving the glow of the computer screen the only thing alive in the dark. For the first time since the engagement announcement, I didn't feel powerless. I wasn't the one being erased anymore. I was the one holding the pen. The next morning, the city felt too bright for what I was planning. Sunlight poured through the blinds, catching dust motes that drifted lazily in the air. It was the kind of morning people used to describe as beautiful, but to me, it just felt indifferent, like the world didn't care that I'd finally stopped pretending to be the quiet one. I made coffee and sat at my desk staring at the folder labeled wedding documents. It glowed faintly in the early light, waiting for me. My hand hovered over the mouse, steady this time. I clicked it open. The files loaded in neat, perfect rows, contracts, receipts, vendor confirmations, all under my name. Magnolia Estate. Crescent Catering. Lillian and Sons Florals. Every piece of Megan's dream wedding was still tethered to me. I scrolled through the emails, reading my own name, over and over, until it started to lose meaning. For years, Megan had taken credit for things she didn't earn: my ideas, my effort, my patience. But this time, she'd built her happiness on a foundation that legally belonged to me. And that was a mistake. My phone buzzed. It was Tessa. "Got your message last night. Are you sure about this?" I stared at the screen for a moment before typing back, "I'm sure. It's not revenge, it's correction," she replied almost instantly. Correction sounds like a word the guilty use to feel righteous. Maybe, I wrote. But it also sounds like balance. She didn't answer after that. The cursor blinked in front of me like it was waiting for permission. I took a slow breath and clicked on the first vendor, Magnolia Estate. Their email chain popped up, warm and professional. I scrolled to the section about cancellations. Requests must be submitted by the primary booking party. Refunds processed to the original payment method. That line made me laugh under my breath. The primary booking party was me. The original payment method was mine. Megan hadn't even bothered to transfer the contracts into her name. She'd assumed the universe, like our mother, would always rearrange itself in her favor. I clicked Cancel Reservation. The confirmation window appeared, polite and final. "Are you sure you want to proceed?" I whispered. "More than you'll ever know," and pressed. Yes. The sound of the confirmation ping was small but satisfying, like the quiet tick of justice being written into the air. Next was the caterer. Then the florist. Then the band. Each one came with a similar prompt, each one ending with that same soft ping. My pulse slowed with every click. This wasn't rage, it was control. A slow, deliberate unwinding of the web they'd spun around me. When it was over, I leaned back in my chair. The apartment was silent except for the low hum of the refrigerator. My reflection shimmered faintly in the dark window of the screen, calm and sharp. I didn't smile. I didn't cry. I just sat there listening to the stillness. Later that morning, I walked to the coffee shop down the street. The barista, a college kid with tired eyes, greeted me with her usual half-smile. "You're up early today." "Couldn't sleep," I said. She nodded like she understood. People always think they do. As I waited for my order, I caught my reflection in the shop's glass case, hair pulled back, eyes steady, no trace of the girl who'd begged her family to see her side. I almost didn't recognize myself, and I liked that. When I got back, my phone buzzed again. A voicemail from Mom. I didn't want to listen, but curiosity won. Her voice was sharp with forced cheer. "Lauren, I just wanted to remind you about the bridal shower this weekend. Megan really hopes you'll come. It would mean a lot to her, and to me." I pressed delete halfway through. The hypocrisy was exhausting. She didn't want peace. She wanted a photo for her social feed, a proof of forgiveness, the illusion that our family wasn't rotting from the inside. I sat down on the couch, sipping coffee that had already gone cold. On the table beside me lay the engagement ring, still in its velvet box. The diamond caught the light, pure and unblemished, like it had never been worn by someone who lied. I thought about mailing it to them again, but no. Let them wonder what I'd done with it. Let uncertainty be their punishment. That afternoon, Tessa stopped by unannounced. She dropped a brown paper bag of bagels on my counter and crossed her arms. "You did it, didn't you?" I looked up from my laptop. "Did what? Don't play innocent? You canceled everything." I met her gaze and said quietly, "I fixed a clerical error." She exhaled, half exasperated, half impressed. "You're terrifying when you're calm." "I'm not calm," I said. "I'm precise." She studied me, trying to decide if I was joking. "You know this will blow up, right?" "She's going to find out." "She already found out," I said. "She just doesn't know it yet." Tessa leaned against the counter, tearing her bagel in half. "You sure you're not doing this to hurt her? I'm doing this, so she stops thinking she can hurt me." She nodded slowly. "Fair." We ate in silence for a few minutes. The quiet between us wasn't awkward. It was heavy, like something sacred. Finally, she said, "You know, most people would just post something vague and petty online. You cancel her entire wedding." I shrugged. "Everyone chooses their art form." When she left, the apartment felt too still again. I turned on some music, low and haunting, and walked to the window. Outside, the world kept moving, people laughing, cars, passing, a couple holding hands under an umbrella. Life had the audacity to keep going. The next day, my inbox filled with automated responses. "Your refund has been processed. Your cancellation request is complete. We hope to serve you again in the future." Each line read like a tiny obituary for the version of me that used to forgive too easily. By late afternoon, my phone rang again. This time, I didn't recognize the number. I answered anyway. "Hi, this is Andrew from Magnolia Estate," the voice said. "We just wanted to confirm the cancellation request came directly from you." "Yes," I said. "Everything under my booking should be voided." He hesitated. "There seems to be some confusion, Miss Pierce. Your sister called earlier about the same reservation. She said it was an error." "It wasn't," I said, keeping my voice even. "She doesn't have authority on the account." "I understand," he said after a pause. "Refund will be processed to your card within 3 business days." "Thank you," I said and hung up. I stared at my reflection in the dark screen of my phone. The calm wasn't an act anymore, it was armor. Around dusk, I poured a glass of wine and sat by the window. The sun was setting, the sky painted in streaks of orange and violet. Somewhere across town, Megan was probably choosing centerpieces or practicing her smile in the mirror. I wondered how long it would take her to realize her fairy tale had already vanished beneath her feet. I sipped the wine slowly. The bitterness lingered, but I didn't mind. It tasted honest. By the time the first streetlights flickered on, I felt something shift inside me. Something small but undeniable. Peace. Not the kind Mom preached about, the one built on silence and submission. This was a different kind. A quiet that belonged entirely to me. I whispered into the dim room, "Let her have her big day." Then I smiled to myself, finishing the thought in my head. Let's see how perfect it looks without the flowers. 2 days passed before I heard anything. The silence was strange, almost disappointing. I'd expected Megan to call, to scream, to demand answers. Instead, nothing. The calm before the collapse. Then, on the third morning, my phone buzzed at 8 a.m. Her name lit up the screen. I let it ring twice before answering. "Lauren," she said, her voice sharp with fake sweetness. "Did you do something with the Magnolia reservation?" I took a slow sip of coffee. "Why do you ask?" She laughed brittle. "Because the manager says there's no active booking under my name. You were the one who reserved it originally, right?" "That's right. Well, I need you to fix it." "I don't know what happened, but I canceled it," I said evenly. There was a pause. "Then I canceled it. Everything under my name." Her breath caught. "You can't be serious." "I'm serious." "Lauren, that was my wedding." "No," I said quietly. "It was mine." "You just borrowed it." The silence that followed was almost musical. Then her voice cracked high and furious. "You're insane. You're jealous and pathetic." And maybe I said, "But I'm also done being quiet." She hissed something I didn't catch before the line went dead. I set my phone down and exhaled the air, leaving my lungs like something I'd been holding for years. My coffee had gone cold, but I didn't care. For once, I didn't feel powerless. I felt deliberate. That afternoon, Tessa stopped by holding 2 iced lattes. "You look suspiciously calm," she said. "I just had an enlightening conversation." With Megan, I nodded. Tessa raised an eyebrow. "And how did enlightenment go?" She called me insane. "Well," she said, sitting on the couch, "she's not wrong. But I like this version of insane better." We laughed, the kind of laugh that felt like release. When it faded, she leaned forward, her tone more careful. "You know she's not going to let this go, right? She'll drag your mom into it. Probably Daniel, too. I know. Are you ready for that?" "I've been ready my whole life," I said. "I just didn't know it." The next morning, Mom called. I didn't answer. She left 3 voicemails, each one angrier than the last. By the 4th, she'd switched to the tone she used for press interviews, smooth, collected, poisonous. "Lauren, I just spoke with your sister. Please tell me this is some misunderstanding. Canceling her venue after everything she's been through, you're tearing this family apart." I deleted them all without listening to the end. That afternoon, a text from Daniel popped up. "Can we talk for a minute?" I considered ignoring it, but curiosity won. "Sure. Coffee shop on King Street, 3 p.m. When I walked in, he was already there, hands folded around a cup, looking older somehow, as if guilt had aged him overnight. He stood when he saw me. "Lauren, Daniel, we Saturday." The silence stretched until I finally said, "Let me guess, she sent you." He looked down. "She's upset. I imagine she is." "She told me you canceled everything." "I did." He rubbed his temples. "Why?" "Because I was tired of people taking things that didn't belong to them." He sighed. "You can't punish her like this. She punished herself when she built her future on a lie." His eyes flickered. "She's sorry." I almost laughed. "No, she's scared." He didn't argue. "You're right," he said quietly. "She is." For a moment, neither of us spoke. The cafe was busy, the hum of conversation filling the space between us. Finally, he said, "She told me you'd moved on." I tilted my head. "And you believed her?" He hesitated. "I wanted to." "That's always been your problem, Daniel. You believe the version of the story that hurts you least." He looked up, and there was something raw in his expression. Remorse, maybe, or recognition. "You're not angry, are you?" I said. "Now I'm just done." He nodded slowly, then said, almost a whisper, "You loved me." I met his gaze. I did. And I think that's the part that embarrasses me most. He winced, then pushed back his chair. "I should go." "You should." As he walked away, I realized I didn't feel vindicated or broken, just weightless. The kind of lightness that comes after you stop carrying something heavy. That night, Mom showed up at my apartment. I saw her reflection in the glass before she knocked her posture, rigid, her lipstick perfect, her face set like marble. I opened the door and didn't bother hiding my exhaustion. "Mom," I said. "Lauren." Her voice was sharp but trembling underneath. "What have you done?" "Corrected a mistake. You've humiliated your sister." "No, she did that herself. I just stopped cleaning up her messes." She stepped forward. "You sound just like your father when he's being cruel." "That's funny," I said, "because I remember you telling me to be more like him." Her face hardened. "You've always had a flair for dramatics. Maybe I learned from you." She drew in a long breath the way she did before a performance. "Listen to me carefully. You will call the venue tomorrow and fix this. Do you understand?" I shook my head. "No, Mom. I finally understand too well." Her voice rose. "You're going to let your sister's wedding fall apart over what a man you didn't even marry. It's not about him." Then what? She snapped. "Jealousy, pride." I met her eyes. Self-respect. For a moment she said nothing. Then she turned toward the door, muttering, "I don't know who you've become." I answered softly, "Someone you can't control." When the door shut, the apartment fell silent again. I sank onto the couch, trembling but steady inside. The tears didn't come. They weren't needed anymore. The next morning, my phone exploded with notifications, photos of Megan crying outside Magnolia. A tweet from one of her bridesmaids. "Can you believe this?" They had no venue 3 weeks before the wedding. The internet, of course, did what it always did. It turned pain into performance. Half the comments mocked her, half pitied her. I didn't read most of them, just watched the chaos swirl from a distance. Tessa texted me a screenshot. "You're officially trending." I typed back I didn't want fame, just silence. She replied, "Silence is the loudest sound right now." By sunset, Megan had called 5 more times. I didn't answer any of them. On the last voicemail, her voice broke. "Are you happy now? You've destroyed everything." Mom's furious. "Daniel won't even look at me." "I hope this feels like justice to you." I listened to it twice, then deleted it. Justice, I thought, wasn't supposed to feel good. It was supposed to feel clean. That night, I poured a glass of wine and stood by the window watching lightning flicker across the horizon. The storm rolled in slow, soft, almost tender. I pressed my hand to the glass and whispered, "You wanted balance, Megan. Now you have it." The thunder answered a beat, later low and approving. Somewhere across town, my family was scrambling to rebuild what they'd broken. And for once, I wasn't part of it. I didn't owe them forgiveness. I didn't owe them silence. I finished my wine, turned off the lights, and let the darkness settle. For the first time in my life, the quiet didn't feel lonely. It felt earned. By the end of that week, the storm had reached full volume. Every time I opened my phone, there was another headline, another post, another thread about the Magnolia mess. Strangers debated my family like it was a TV drama. Some called Megan a victim. Others called her karma in heels. A few found me tagging my old photography page, saying things like, "Respect to the sister who said enough." I didn't reply. I didn't post. I didn't defend myself. I just watched the noise burn itself out. Mom, of course, couldn't handle silence. She called every day, switching between guilt, anger, and control. On Tuesday, her voice was honeyed again. "Lauren, sweetheart, your sister is in tears. Can't you at least speak to her? You've made your point." "My point," I said, "wasn't for you to understand." Her tone sharpened. "You've embarrassed this family. Do you know what people are saying?" "Yes," I said. "And for once they're not saying it about me." The click on the other end was sharp enough to make me smile. That same afternoon, Tessa came over with takeout and 2 bottles of wine. "You're famous," she said, tossing her phone on the couch. "Half the city thinks you're a feminist hero, the other half thinks you're Satan in silk. I can live with that." She grinned. "You always could. We ate in comfortable silence for a while. Then she looked at me seriously. So what now, are you just going to watch it all implode? I swirled my wine glass. Implosions don't need audiences. They happen just fine on their own. She laughed softly. You're scary when you sound poetic. I'm not scary. I'm free. Later, when she left, the apartment felt too big. The kind of big that used to scare me. Not anymore. I cleaned the kitchen, folded laundry, played old records. It was strange how normal life could coexist with chaos like two parallel worlds that never touched. That night, as I scrolled through emails, a new one caught my eye. Subject line: Cancelled order confirmation. It was from Lillian & Sons Florals. Dear Miss Pierce, we wanted to thank you for your business. Your refund has been processed. Wishing you the best in your future celebrations. Future celebrations. The phrase stung in a way I didn't expect. For a moment I thought about what my wedding would have looked like. The white jasmine arches, the string quartet, the gold-accented place settings I'd spent weeks designing. Then I closed my eyes and exhaled. That future wasn't mine anymore. And maybe it never had been. The next morning, a knock startled me awake. When I opened the door, Dad was standing there holding a grocery bag, rainwater dripping from his jacket. He looked older than I remembered, tired, maybe even apologetic. Can I come in? He asked. I nodded. He placed the bag on the counter. Bread, fruit, milk. Your mother said you weren't eating. She says a lot of things, I said, turning away. He sighed, looking around my apartment like it was unfamiliar territory. Grace is upset, Megan, I corrected automatically. He blinked. Right, Megan. She says you canceled everything. I did. His brow furrowed. Why? Because it was mine. He rubbed his temples. You know she didn't mean to hurt you. That's her favorite trick, I said. Hurting people and calling it an accident. He looked down, fingers gripping the back of a chair. You've always been the strong one. We thought you could handle things better than she could. I let out a small, humorless laugh. That's not strength, Dad. That's neglect with a polite name. He didn't respond right away. For once he looked like he didn't have an excuse ready. You're still my daughter, he said finally. I hate seeing you like this. I'm fine, I said softly. For the first time, I really am. He studied me, unsure whether to believe it. Then he nodded, slow and uncertain. Your mother won't understand. She doesn't need to. When he left, the apartment was quieter than before. I stood by the door for a long moment, forehead against the cool wood, listening to the rain outside. By the weekend, the tabloids had already moved on to another scandal. But inside our family, the silence thickened. Mom stopped calling. Megan didn't reach out. It was almost peaceful until Sunday night. I was making dinner when my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. You win. It took me a second to recognize the tone. Megan. Another text followed. The Harrington dropped us. The florist, too. You've destroyed everything. I stared at the words until they blurred. Then I typed back, no, I just returned what was mine. I hovered over send, then deleted it. She didn't deserve my words. Silence would hurt more. That night, Tessa came over again, hair still damp from the rain. She threw her bag on the couch. I just saw your sister. She looks like she's been crying for days. Good, I said without emotion. Tessa studied me. You don't even sound angry anymore. I'm not. Anger's noisy. I like quiet. Doesn't it feel empty? I thought for a moment. Empty is better than invisible. We sat there for a while, the city humming faintly outside. Then she asked, do you ever think you went too far? I looked out the window. The rain streaked down the glass, turning the lights into smudges of gold and blue. Too far is what people say when you finally stop giving them what they don't deserve. She nodded slowly. So what's next? I don't know yet, I admitted. Maybe I'll finally start living for myself. When she left, I didn't turn on the lights. I just stood by the window watching the storm fade into mist. Somewhere across town, my family was probably still scrambling to repair their image. Daniel was probably drowning in guilt. Megan was probably rewriting the story so she could live with it. But me, I was done rewriting anything. I pulled out my camera for the first time in weeks. The lens was dusty, the battery nearly dead. I cleaned it carefully, adjusting the focus until the reflection of my own face came into view. My hair was messy, my eyes tired, but they were mine. The light from the street poured across my features, soft and uneven, the kind of light photographers call honest. I clicked the shutter. The sound was sharp and satisfying, echoing through the still apartment. I looked at the photo that appeared on the screen, a self-portrait, raw and imperfect. It wasn't beautiful in the way my old work was. It was real. Maybe that was the beginning of something new. I poured a glass of wine and stood at the window, camera still warm in my hands. The rain had stopped completely, and the clouds were beginning to part, revealing a thin sliver of moonlight. For the first time in months, I didn't feel like I was waiting for someone to save me or apologize. I just stood there, breathing, existing unshaken. The world outside kept turning. The city lights blinked like tired stars. Somewhere my sister's empire was collapsing. My mother's lies were cracking. Daniel's regrets were blooming. And I for once wasn't the one cleaning up the mess. I lifted my camera again, aimed it at the skyline and whispered, "Let's capture this too, the quiet after everything burns." Then I pressed the shutter and watched the flash paint the room with light. 3 days passed, and the world pretended to move on. The gossip sites found new scandals. The hashtags faded, but inside, my family's silence, something ugly was brewing. I could feel it like static in the air, unspoken, waiting. Every morning I checked my phone, half expecting another message from Megan, another threat, another plea. Nothing came. The quiet almost felt like mercy until I realized it was calculation. She was planning her next move. Then on Thursday, Tessa walked into my studio holding a paper bag of muffins and bad news. "You're not going to like this," she said. "I rarely do." She handed me her phone. A photo filled the screen, Megan, standing in a bridal boutique, radiant as ever, surrounded by her bridesmaids. The caption read, "Resilience. That's what love looks like." "She's still going through with it," Tessa said. "Of course she is," I murmured. "Megan doesn't lose. She just changes the story." "She moved the wedding to Harrington Grand," Tessa added softly. "Same date, same everything." For a moment I couldn't breathe. The Harrington, the place Daniel and I had first toured together, where we'd stood under the chandeliers talking about forever. I'd canceled that venue weeks ago. But she had found another way to make it hers. Tessa studied me. "What are you going to do?" "Nothing," I said finally. "Let her have her fairy tale. Even glass castles crack." That night I dreamed of the two of them standing at the altar, smiling for cameras, my mother glowing with pride beside them. But behind them, the walls trembled, the lights flickered, and the ground split beneath their feet. I woke up before the collapse. The next morning the city air was thick with humidity pressing against the windows like breath. I made coffee, checked my email, and found a new message waiting for me. From Daniel Hayes, subject, "We need to talk." I stared at it for a long time before opening it. "Lauren, I know you probably don't want to hear from me, but I need to see you. It's important. Please don't ignore this." I didn't reply. Instead, I poured another cup of coffee and tried to convince myself that indifference was strength. But by afternoon, I found myself driving downtown anyway. He was waiting at a small cafe near the river. When I walked in, he stood immediately, hands shoved in his pockets like a man waiting for judgment. "You look good," he said too carefully. "Don't," I said. "You don't get to say that anymore." He nodded, sitting back down. I deserved that. The silence between us stretched like a wound. Finally, he said, "I saw the video." My heart stopped. "What video?" He reached into his jacket and pulled out his phone. "The one of Megan, with Liam." I blinked, confused. "Liam, your best man." He nodded, jaw tight. "Someone sent it to me. She was drunk, maybe." But the way she looked at him, he broke off, pressing a hand to his face. "I can't marry her, Lauren. I can't do it." I stared at him, my pulse hammering. "Who sent it?" He hesitated. You don't know. I shook my head slowly. Daniel, I didn't. He looked up sharply. Then who? The truth hit me like a slow, cold wave. Tessa. She'd been filming behind the scenes at a charity gala weeks ago, where Megan had shown up tipsy, all charm and careless laughter. I remembered Tessa mentioning it the moment Megan had gotten a little too close to Liam. I swallowed hard. It doesn't matter who sent it. You saw what you needed to see. He exhaled shakily. She called me jealous when I confronted her, said I was paranoid that you must have planted it. And you believed her. He looked down. Not this time. For the first time since everything fell apart, I felt something shift between us. Not love, not nostalgia, but understanding. He wasn't asking for forgiveness. He was asking for truth. What are you going to do? I asked. His answer came quietly. The right thing. When I left the cafe, the air outside felt heavier than before. Thunder rolled somewhere in the distance. I knew what was coming. The reckoning wasn't mine anymore, it was his. That night, Mom called again. I let it go to voicemail, but I listened this time. Her voice was brittle, desperate. Lauren, please. Daniel's acting strange. Megan's worried sick. She said he won't answer her calls. If you had anything to do with this, I stopped the message there. The irony was sharp. For years, she'd told me not to cause scenes, not to speak too loudly, not to make waves. And now all her carefully constructed silence was crumbling because someone else finally refused to play along. The next morning, Tessa stopped by again. Her face was pale, her usual smirk gone. You're trending again, she said quietly. I didn't even look up from my computer. What now? She set her phone on the table. Number the runaway groom. I blinked. What, he walked out of the rehearsal dinner last night, she said. Left Megan standing there in front of everyone. For a second I couldn't process it. Then slowly the corner of my mouth lifted. He did it. Tessa sat down. You don't look happy. I'm not sure happy's the right word, I said. Maybe finished. She nodded slowly. You know this means war, right? Megan's going to come for you harder than ever. She can try, I said. But I'm not playing anymore. I turned back to my screen. The rain started again outside, soft but relentless. Somewhere across town, my sister was unraveling, my mother was spinning stories, and Daniel was finally telling the truth. Tessa studied me. You're scaring me a little, she said. I'm not doing anything, I said. I'm just watching gravity do its job. By evening, my phone was full of missed calls again. Megan, Mom, even Dad. I ignored them all. The rain grew louder, drowning out their voices, washing the world clean for a moment. I stood by the window watching lightning split the sky and whispered to the storm. Let them call me jealous. Let them call me cruel. I just told the truth first, the thunder answered, low and distant. Down below, the streets shimmered under the downpour. Somewhere, Megan was probably throwing things, blaming me for a collapse that had nothing to do with me anymore. For the first time, I didn't feel guilty. I didn't even feel vindicated. I just felt calm. Justice didn't always roar. Sometimes it whispered in the shape of rain. And in that quiet, I realized something simple. I didn't want revenge anymore. I wanted peace. But peace didn't mean forgiveness, it meant distance. I turned off my phone, poured a glass of wine, and let the storm play its song. The city glowed faintly beneath the clouds, the world still spinning, unstoppable and indifferent. Somewhere between one sip and the next, I decided I'd never let them drag me back into their story again. My chapter had already started. And this time it was mine alone. The morning of Megan's wedding arrived, dressed in sunshine, cruelly beautiful. Charleston was quiet except for the distant hum of church bells and the soft whine of cicadas rising with the heat. I stood by my window, coffee in hand, watching people hurry along the sidewalks, their lives untouched by the chaos waiting to unfold across town. On my phone, the first notification of the day blinked to life. Megan Pierce tagged you in a post. Against my better judgment, I opened it. Her smile filled the screen, radiant in silk, surrounded by bridesmaids in pale lavender. The caption read, "No storm lasts forever." For a second, I almost admired her audacity. Meghan could build an empire out of delusion. Tessa's message came next. She really went through with it. Harrington Grand. Ceremony starts at noon. I typed back, "Let the show begin." By 10, the city felt like it was holding its breath. I dressed simply: white blouse, black jeans, hair tied back. I wasn't invited, but I didn't need to be there to see everything. Tessa had that covered. Her team was hired to assist the new photography crew. She promised to keep me updated. When she called just before the ceremony, her whisper came through like static. "She looks perfect, like nothing ever happened. Your mom's here too. She's glowing like she's hosting a royal coronation." "Of course she is," I said, sipping my coffee. "They love the illusion of control." And Daniel. Tessa paused. "Quiet. Too quiet. He looks elsewhere." I stared out the window, the city blurring beneath a bright haze. Then, he already knows. Down at the Harrington Grand, Meghan's guests arrived in sleek black cars, smiling for photos, like they were entering history. The ballroom glimmered: white roses, gold runners, crystal chandeliers, reflecting soft light. The entire scene was immaculate, sterile, expensive. At exactly 12, the music began. Meghan walked down the aisle, every step a performance. She glowed under the chandelier's hand, clutching her bouquet like a trophy. My mother beamed from the front row, dabbing at her eyes for the cameras. Tessa's texts came in short bursts. "She's walking. He's waiting." Crowd silent. "This is insane." I sat on my couch, one hand wrapped around my mug, the other gripping my phone. My heartbeat slowed instead of racing. I felt still, detached, like a spectator at the end of a long play. Then came the pause. The one Tessa later told me felt endless. The officiant asked Daniel if he would take Meghan Pierce to be his lawfully wedded wife. He didn't answer right away. People shifted in their seats. Someone coughed. Meghan smiled tighter, whispering something only he could hear. And then Daniel said softly, "Can I say something first?" Tessa's text arrived seconds later. Oh my God, I closed my eyes. The sunlight on my skin felt hot, heavy, almost electric. He spoke slowly, deliberately. "I made a promise to myself once that I'd never marry a lie. Today I almost broke that promise." Gasps filled the room. Meghan froze, her smile trembling. "Daniel," she said quietly, "what are you doing?" He looked at her, his voice steady now. "You lied to me. You lied to everyone. And I can't build forever on that." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. My mother stood up, face pale but composed, whispering urgently to him. "We can talk about this privately." "No," he said. "I think we're done pretending." And then he walked away. The next text from Tessa was shaky, letters jumbled. He left. Lauren, he just left. In the middle of the vows, I set my phone down carefully, like it was something fragile. The air around me felt sharper, clearer, the kind that follows lightning. My hands didn't shake. My chest didn't tighten. I just stood there breathing, as if my lungs had been waiting for this moment for years. Somewhere across the city, cameras were flashing, guests were whispering. My mother was probably crying into her pearls. Meghan would be screaming, of course. And the world finally was seeing her without the spotlight's protection. When Tessa called later, her voice was breathless. "You won't believe it. Reporters are everywhere. She's in the hallways sobbing. Your mom's trying to spin it, saying he had a panic attack." I walked to the window, watching the breeze stir the magnolia trees outside. "Let her. Every story they tell digs them deeper." Tessa hesitated. "Do you feel better?" I thought for a moment. "No. But I feel finished." The news spread like wildfire. By evening, social media was ablaze with clips and headlines. Groom walks out on influencer bride. Charleston's most talked about wedding ends in scandal. Hashtags bloomed overnight: number runaway groom, number magnolia meltdown, number Pierce family drama. I didn't post. I didn't comment. I just watched. Mom left 3 voicemails. The first was shock. "Lauren, what did you do?" The second was anger. You've gone too far. The third was quiet, almost broken. Your sister won't stop crying. She says everyone's laughing at her. I deleted all of them. By dusk, the city began to calm again. The sun bled into the horizon, painting the buildings gold. I stood on my balcony, glass of wine in hand, the distant sirens fading to hums. For years I had imagined revenge as a fire, loud, consuming, bright. But this wasn't fire. This was water, silent, patient, eroding everything that wasn't built on truth. When my phone buzzed again, I didn't look right away, but curiosity won. It was a video from Tessa. The camera shook slightly, filming the ballroom's aftermath. The floral arches were wilting. Guests stood awkwardly whispering. In the center of the chaos, Megan sat on the floor, veil, crooked mascara streaking down her face. My mother crouched beside her, whispering furiously, trying to fix what couldn't be fixed. Tessa's voice was faint behind the lens. They're saying the venue's charging for everything up front since the cancellation mess. No refunds. I watched Megan lift her head, eyes wild. For a second, she looked straight into the camera, and I swear it felt like she was looking at me. I closed the video and set my phone face down. The apartment was quiet except for the soft hum of the refrigerator. Outside, a single car drove by, its headlights slicing through the twilight. I whispered to the stillness, "This isn't revenge, it's balance." I finished my wine and left the glass on the counter, a small ring of condensation marking where it had stood. As night fell, rain began again, soft, almost tender, tapping against the windows like a lullaby. I sat in the dark, listening, the sound wrapping around me like peace. Down the street, thunder rolled, low and distant. For the first time in years, I didn't feel erased. I didn't feel jealous. I didn't feel small. I just felt seen. And in that quiet moment, I knew something the rest of them hadn't learned yet. Truth doesn't need an audience. It just needs time. The morning after the wedding was strangely still. The city, so loud the night before with gossip and camera flashes, had quieted into a dull hum. I woke to sunlight spilling across my kitchen counter, cutting through half-empty glasses and the faint scent of rain. For a few seconds, I forgot what had happened. Then my phone buzzed and the world reminded me. There were over 40 missed calls. Mom, Megan, even a few numbers I didn't recognize. My voicemail icon blinked like a heartbeat. I pressed play once, maybe out of morbid curiosity. Mom's voice filled the room, brittle and cold. "I hope you're proud of yourself. Your sister's in pieces. You've shamed this family, Lauren. She can't even leave the house without people pointing. This is beyond cruel." I stopped the message halfway through. Cruel. That word used to pierce. Now it just sounded tired. I poured myself coffee and stared out the window. Outside, the street glimmered, wet, reflective, impossibly calm. Life moved on. It always did. By noon, Tessa came over, hair pulled into a messy bun, dark circles under her eyes. She dropped a newspaper on the counter. "You made front page again," she said flatly. The headline screamed, "Runaway groom scandal shocks Charleston sisters' revenge." I sighed. They always need a villain. At least they spelled your name right this time. She tried to smile, but it didn't stick. "You, okay, I think so," I said, though I wasn't sure what okay meant anymore. Tessa leaned against the counter, studying me. "You know she's not done right, Megan. She's going to spin this. She'll say you sent that video, that you ruined her life on purpose." I shrugged. Let her. The truth doesn't care about her PR strategy. Tessa hesitated. "She posted something an hour ago." I looked up. "What kind of something?" She turned her phone toward me. On the screen was a picture of Megan, her face pale, but composed, holding a bouquet of wilted roses. The caption read, "Some people spend their lives destroying others because they can't stand to see them shine. But love always survives." My jaw tightened. "She's good. I'll give her that." "You could respond," Tessa said carefully. "Set the record straight." I shook my head. "That's what she wants, a public feud. I'm not feeding her anymore." Tessa studied me for a moment longer, then sighed. "You're handling this better than I would." I'm tired, I said. Not noble. Just tired. That evening I walked to the lake. The air was cool and the water reflected the sunset in ribbons of gold and gray. I sat on a bench watching ripples expand across the surface until they disappeared. That was how peace worked, I realized, not sudden, not loud. Just slow reclamation. When I got home, there was an envelope on my doorstep. No return address. My name written in my mother's elegant cursive. I knew the handwriting too well to mistake it. Inside was a single sheet of paper. Lauren, you've humiliated us. Your sister may never recover from what you've done. You've always been jealous, but this is unforgivable. Until you find it in your heart to make things right, don't contact us. We're done. Mom, I stood there in the doorway, the paper trembling slightly in my hands. Then I folded it once, twice, and dropped it in the trash. When Tessa came by later, I told her about the letter. She didn't look surprised. You know she was always going to pick Megan. It's muscle memory by now. I know, I said softly. It's just strange when confirmation hurts less than expectation. We sat on the couch eating takeout, the glow from the streetlights washing the room in pale amber. Tessa finally broke the silence. Do you miss her, Megan? She nodded. I thought about it. About the childhood summers when we'd share popsicles on the porch, when she'd braid my hair and whisper secrets about the boys at school. Before ambition replaced affection. Before Mom taught her that being adored was worth more than being kind. Sometimes I admitted. But I don't miss the version she became. Tessa nodded slowly. And Daniel. The name sat between us like a bruise. He made his choice. Now he's living with it. She tilted her head. And if he called, I looked at her. I'd let it go to voicemail. 2 days later, he did call. His voice, when I answered, was low and uncertain. Lauren, I don't even know what to say. Then don't, I said. I'm sorry. For everything. For believing her. For what I did to you. I closed my eyes. Sorry doesn't change anything. I know. But I thought you should hear it. There was silence. The kind that used to stretch between us after arguments when neither of us wanted to admit who was wrong. It felt strangely familiar, almost comforting in its finality. I hope you find peace, Daniel, I said finally. Just not with me. He didn't argue. You already have it, don't you? Something close. After the call, I sat on the floor, leaning against the couch, staring at the quiet apartment around me. The air smelled faintly of jasmine from the candle I'd forgotten to blow out. I realized how much space silence could take up when it wasn't filled with noise. That night, Tessa texted me a photo from downtown. A mural had appeared overnight on the side of a coffee shop, a painting of a bride walking away from an altar veil, trailing behind her like a ribbon of smoke. Someone had scrawled in bold letters underneath. Sometimes leaving is the beginning. It's you, she texted. Someone out there gets it. I stared at the image for a long time before replying. Maybe it's not about revenge anymore. Maybe it never was. She sent back a heart emoji, and for the first time in weeks, I smiled without irony. The next morning, I went for a walk through the city. The air smelled of fresh bread and wet asphalt. People passed me oblivious to the quiet history running parallel to their morning errands. At a small bookstore, I stopped to look at the window display new releases about healing, recovery, letting go. I laughed softly. Maybe the universe had a sense of humor after all. When I got home, I picked up my camera again. Not for work, not for escape. Just to remember what beauty looked like when it wasn't attached to pain. I took photos of everything: the light on my coffee mug, the way the rain traced lines down the window, the half-dead plant that somehow kept growing back. Nothing perfect, everything real. Later that afternoon, I sent a few of the shots to Maria, an old gallery contact who'd always loved my earlier work. She replied within an hour. They're beautiful, raw. We're curating a show next month about transformation. You should submit. Transformation. The word stayed with me long after I closed the laptop. That evening, as twilight settled over the city, I stood by my balcony with a glass of wine, the sounds of traffic fading into the distance. Somewhere, Megan was still fighting to control the narrative. Mom was still rewriting history. But I didn't need to correct them anymore. The truth didn't need defending. It just needed breathing room. The wind picked up brushing my hair across my face. I smiled into the dark and whispered, "Let them call it revenge if it helps them sleep. I know what it really was. It wasn't destruction. It was freedom." 3 days after the chaos, the headlines had started to fade, but the silence between us had calcified into something permanent. I hadn't spoken to Mom since her letter, and Megan hadn't stopped posting cryptic messages about healing and betrayal. Her followers, ever loyal, flooded her comments with sympathy and thinly veiled outrage. She deserved better. Family can be the worst kind of enemy. I read them once, then stopped checking. Let them build their story. I was done living inside it. That morning I woke to an email from Maria, the gallery curator I'd sent photos to. "We love your submission. There's a slot opening next month for a new exhibit, Still Life After the Storm. Your work fits perfectly. Can we talk?" For a long time I just stared at the screen. Then I typed back, "Yes, let's do it." It wasn't triumph I felt. It was something quieter, maybe permission. Later that afternoon, I met Maria downtown at a small cafe tucked between antique shops. She looked like someone carved out of light and composure, gray hair cut blunt at the shoulders, silver bracelets stacked on one wrist. When she smiled, it felt like sunlight after weeks of fog. "I've followed your photography for years," she said. "Weddings, portraits, family gatherings, your work has always had this ache to it. Like you were chasing something you couldn't quite touch." I laughed softly. That's one way to describe my 20s. And now she asked, "Now I'm not chasing anything." She nodded, thoughtful. "Good. Then maybe this time you'll let people come to you." We talked for an hour. About my photos, about what I wanted them to say, about truth, silence, and the strange beauty that comes from surviving the wreckage. By the end, she reached across the table and said, "I think we're going to make something real here." Walking home, the air felt lighter, the city less sharp. I passed by a florist and stopped for no reason at all. The smell of jasmine hit me like memory, sweet, heady, and alive. I bought a small bouquet. When the woman behind the counter wrapped it in paper, she smiled. "For someone special, for myself," I said. That night, Tessa came over with takeout and a bottle of wine. She dropped her bag and eyed the flowers on the counter. "You redecorating, or is this part of your rebirth arc?" I grinned. "Maybe both." She poured wine into 2 mismatched glasses. "You know, people online are calling you the runaway sister. Some think you planned everything like a movie." I rolled my eyes. "Let them. If it keeps them entertained, maybe they'll stop dissecting my childhood trauma," she snorted. Doubtful, but still it's weirdly poetic. Megan staged her entire life like a film, and in the end, you became the twist. I paused, the words settling deep. I never wanted to be the twist. I just wanted to be written in the script. Tessa's smile softened. "You are now." We spent the evening talking about the exhibit. I showed her the shots I'd chosen, simple ones but heavy in their stillness. An empty church pew, a cup of coffee, half finished, the reflection of a woman's face in rain-streaked glass. Tessa studied them carefully. "You finally stopped photographing what people pretend to feel," she said. "You're showing what they really live with. Maybe because I finally stopped pretending, too." She lifted her glass. "To truth, then." "To silence," I said. "The kind that heals instead of hides." When she left, I stood by the window and watched the city's lights flicker like small confessions. Somewhere, a siren wailed, and in the distance, thunder rolled again. The next morning, my phone buzzed before sunrise. It was Dad. I hadn't heard his voice in weeks. "Lauren," he said quietly, "your mother saw the photos online." I exhaled. "Of course she did. She's upset. She's always upset." He sighed. "She said you're exploiting the family." I laughed under my breath. I turned pain into art. If that's exploitation, then maybe she should have treated the subject better. "Lauren." His voice softened. I know things got ugly. But your mother, she's not good at apologies. Maybe this exhibit scares her. Maybe it reminds her of things she'd rather forget. So instead of facing them, she blames me. She doesn't know another way. I looked out at the rising sun, the sky bleeding pink over the horizon. Dad, I spent my whole life learning her ways. I think it's time she learns mine. He didn't argue. He just said quietly, I'm proud of you, even if she can't say it yet. After the call, I sat on the balcony with my coffee, the city waking below. I thought about forgiveness, the kind people expected you to hand out like charity. I wasn't there yet. Maybe I never would be. 2 weeks later, Maria called. It's official, she said. You're headlining the exhibit. I nearly dropped the phone. Headlining people need this story, she said. Not the gossip version, the real one. The one where a woman takes her pain and reframes it instead of letting it define her. I didn't respond right away. My throat felt tight, but not from sadness, from release. When I told Tessa later, she whooped so loud I had to pull the phone away. Look at you, queen of poetic justice. It's not justice, I said softly. It's survival turned into something useful. Whatever you call it, it's power. I smiled. Maybe. But this time, it's quiet power. The following week, I met Maria again at the gallery. The walls were white, the air smelling faintly of varnish and paint. My photos leaned against the floor, waiting to be hung. As I walked through, I noticed one image in particular, the self-portrait I'd taken weeks ago sitting on the floor, eyes red but steady. Maria caught me looking. That one's your center, she said. The moment before rebirth. I wasn't sure I wanted to show it. That's how you know you have to. As the installation took shape, I felt something shift inside me again. Not pride exactly, but reclamation. This time, every frame on those walls belonged to me. No borrowed joy, no stolen spotlight, just truth. Afterward, Maria handed me a printed flyer. You invited a photography exhibit by Lauren Pierce. I laughed softly at the title. You named it after me, she smiled. No, I named it after every woman who's ever been told to stay quiet. That night, as I walked home, the streetlights flickered above me like faint applause. I thought about everything that had led here, the betrayal, the humiliation, the silence that once felt like punishment, but had become a kind of sanctuary. When I reached my apartment, I paused at the door, looking back down the empty hallway. For the first time, it didn't feel lonely. It felt earned. Inside, the air smelled of jasmine again. The flowers I'd bought were wilting slightly, but they still filled the room with life. I sat on the couch, turned on the lamp, and picked up my camera. The lens caught my reflection in the dark window, older, calmer, and entirely unrecognizable from the woman who once begged to be believed. I smiled at her. Then I pressed the shutter. The sound was soft, final, and perfect. The night before the opening felt like the longest in my life. The city outside hummed quietly, but my apartment was still heavy with anticipation. I sat on the floor, surrounded by framed photographs, waiting to be delivered to the gallery. My reflection looked back at me, in the glass, older, calmer, almost unfamiliar. At midnight, I poured a glass of wine and walked out to the balcony. The air was cool, the kind that smells faintly like salt and jasmine after a storm. Somewhere in the distance, a train passed, its echo stretching across the city. I whispered to myself, you made it through. It wasn't victory, it was survival, plain and clean. By morning, the day of the exhibit, the gallery was buzzing. People milled around with coffee cups and clipboards, voices overlapping in a blur of excitement. Maria waved at me the moment I stepped in, her silver hair gleaming under the lights. You ready? She asked, squeezing my arm. I think so, I said, though my pulse told a different story. Don't worry, she smiled. The art does the talking. The walls looked bare and wholly white, canvases of air and silence between the photographs. My work. My truth. The room smelled faintly of wood polish and new beginnings. By 7, guests began arriving. Critics, local artists, even a few familiar faces from my old photography circles. Their voices filled the room soft and reverent. Every now and then I'd catch snippets of their conversations, raw, honest, haunting. It felt strange hearing those words about my own life. Then I saw Dad standing near the doorway, holding a folded coat and looking entirely out of place. He hadn't said he was coming. When our eyes met, he smiled faintly and made his way toward me. "I wasn't sure if I should be here," he said quietly. "I wasn't sure you would be." He nodded. "Your mother didn't come." "I figured," I said softly. "She said she couldn't bear to see our mistakes hanging on a wall. Then maybe she's not ready to see the truth." He exhaled long and slow. "Maybe. But I am. And I'm proud of you, Lauren." The words hit me harder than I expected. Pride had never been his language. "Thank you," I said, my voice catching. He looked around at the photographs. "You turned pain into light," he said. "That's rare." When he walked away, I stayed still for a moment, breathing it in. For the first time in years, the word daughter didn't feel like an apology. Half an hour later, Maria approached. "There's someone here asking for you," she said carefully. "Your sister." The room seemed to tilt slightly. "Megan's here. She's standing by the back wall," Maria said, her eyes searching mine. "Do you want me to ask her to leave?" I hesitated. "No," I said finally. "Let her stay." Megan looked smaller than I remembered. Her hair was pulled back, makeup subtleized, tired. She wasn't the glossy version of herself the internet knew. She was human again, fragile and trembling. I walked over slowly, heart steady, hands cold. She turned as I approached. "Lauren," she said softly. "Megan." She looked around the room. "So, this is what you've been doing, turning our disaster into art." "It's not about you," I said quietly. She flinched but didn't look away. "It feels like it is." "Then maybe that's your guilt talking." Her lips parted like she wanted to argue, but nothing came out. Finally she whispered, "You really hate me, don't you?" "I don't," I said. "I stopped hating you the day I stopped needing you to be different." Her eyes filled. "I didn't mean for things to go that far. With Daniel. With Mom. I thought you'd always forgive me." "I used to," I said. "Until forgiveness turned into permission." She looked down, her voice cracking. "Everyone hates me now. I almost reached for her, but I didn't. They don't hate you, Megan. They're just seeing you without the filter. That's scarier than hate." She wiped her cheek, laughing weakly. "You really are different now. I had to be." For a moment we stood in silence, surrounded by strangers studying fragments of our lives. Finally, she said, "I saw your photo online. The self-portrait. You look peaceful." "I am," I said simply. She nodded slowly. "I want that someday." "Then stop performing," I said gently. "Start listening." Her mouth trembled. "To what?" "To the quiet. It tells you who you are." Before she could answer, someone called my name from across the gallery, a journalist holding a recorder. Megan stepped back, her composure fracturing again. "I should go," she murmured. I nodded. "Take care of yourself." She hesitated at the door, turning once. "Lauren, yeah, I'm sorry," she said, "for all of it." I didn't reply. I just let the silence answer for both of us. When she was gone, Maria came up beside me. "You okay?" I exhaled. "Better than I thought I'd be." The rest of the evening passed in a blur of flashes, handshakes, and congratulations. People wanted to talk about light, about resilience, about how art could heal what family had broken. I smiled, politely answered their questions, but inside I was somewhere else, still standing in that quiet space between apology and release. Later, after everyone had gone, the gallery was empty except for me and the photographs. The air was thick with the ghosts of conversations, the hum of lights dimming overhead. I walked to the center of the room and looked at the self-portrait one last time. For years I'd been framed by other people's versions of me. The quiet one, the jealous one, the dramatic one. Now I was the author of my own frame. The sound of footsteps echoed softly behind me. I turned to see Maria holding 2 glasses of champagne. For the woman who taught us silence can roar, she said, handing me one. I laughed softly. You're going to make me cry. She clinked her glass against mine. Let it out. It's what got you here. We stood in the middle of the gallery, surrounded by the light of 1,000 small truths, and toasted to what was finally ours. When I got home that night, the city was asleep. I set my keys on the counter, kicked off my shoes, and sat by the window. The jasmine flowers I'd bought weeks ago had dried out, their petals brittle and curling. Still, they smelled faintly sweet. I thought about Megan's face in the gallery, the way her eyes had softened when she said she was sorry. Maybe someday that would mean something. Maybe it already did. I took my camera from the shelf and pointed it toward the window. The reflection in the glass wasn't tired anymore. It wasn't haunted. It was just me, steady, alive, and unafraid of the dark. The shutter clicked once, a quiet punctuation mark at the end of everything. Outside, a single streetlight flickered, then steadied, spilling its glow across the sidewalk like a small, forgiving Sunday. The morning after the exhibit felt like waking into a different season. The air was lighter, the city quieter, as if everything had exhaled at once. I made coffee and stood by the window, the steam curling against my face. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was waiting for something. An apology, a reckoning, a sign that I mattered. The world hadn't changed, but I had. Maria called before noon. Her voice was bright alive. Lauren, congratulations. You're on the front page of Southern Arts Weekly. They called your show a symphony of survival. I laughed softly. A symphony? That's dramatic. Let them be dramatic, she said. You've earned it. I thanked her, hung up, and scrolled through the article. The headline read, "Photographer turns betrayal into art and finds herself." Below it was a photo of me standing beside my self-portrait, the lights catching just enough to blur the outline of my face. The writer called it "the moment silence became language." I read that line twice. Maybe it was true. A text buzzed through Tessa. "The review is incredible. You're officially famous. Also, brunch, I'm outside." I opened the door to find her holding 2 iced coffees and wearing her usual sunglasses even though the morning was gray. "I'm still not over that show," she said, stepping inside. "You do realize half the crowd cried right? I didn't plan that," I said, smiling. "That's why it worked," she said, handing me the coffee. "You didn't perform it. You lived it." We sat at the kitchen table, the kind of comfortable silence that only exists between people who have seen each other through the worst. Tessa leaned back in her chair. "So what now? Another exhibit? Maybe a memoir called 'My Sister Stole My Fiancé and I Stole the Spotlight'?" I laughed, nearly spilling my coffee. "God, no. No more stories about her. Or Mom. Or any of it." She smiled knowingly. "So you're done?" "I'm finally done." The rest of the day passed in quiet rhythm. I met Maria at the gallery to help take down the show. She insisted I keep one piece, the self-portrait. "You'll need a reminder," she said, "not of the pain, but of what you did with it." As we wrapped the photograph, I noticed a figure standing near the entrance. Dad. He looked smaller than before, like the weight of everything had finally caught up. "I didn't expect to see you again," I said. He smiled faintly. "I told your mother I was going for a walk. Does she know you're here?" "She will," he said. "And she'll be furious. But that's all right. I'm tired of keeping the peace if it means losing my daughter." The words hit something deep. I swallowed hard. "Thank you." He looked at the photo leaning against the wall. "She saw the review too," he said quietly. "She won't admit it, but I think it shook her." I didn't answer. "She said you looked calm," he added. "Like you'd finally stopped needing her approval." "She's not wrong." He smiled sadly. "Maybe that's why she can't stop thinking about you." We talked for a while, nothing heavy, nothing rehearsed. Just small things. The kind of conversation I'd always wanted but never thought possible. When he left, he hugged me. Not the polite kind parents give their grown children, but something slower, older, like he was trying to make up for all the times he hadn't. After he was gone, I lingered in the empty gallery. The walls looked naked without the photos, but in that emptiness there was peace. Every mark on the wall, every nail hole felt earned. That night I walked along the lake. The air smelled like rain again, and the water mirrored the lights of the city in soft ripples. My phone buzzed in my pocket, a new message from an unknown number. For a moment I thought about ignoring it. Then I opened it. It was Megan. I saw the review. "You deserved it." The photos were beautiful. "I'm trying to get help. Really trying. I hope someday we can start over." I stared at the words for a long time. My first instinct was to delete the message. Then I thought of her face at the exhibit, the crack in her voice when she said she wanted peace. I typed back slowly. "I believe you. Take care of yourself." Then I set the phone down and watched the water, feeling something inside me loosen, like the final knot untangling. Weeks passed. The exhibit's success led to another offer, then another. Maria wanted to take the show to New York, but I told her I needed time. I wasn't running toward anything anymore. I just wanted to live without turning it into art. Ethan called one evening. I hadn't heard from him since before the chaos. His voice was warm but hesitant. I saw the photos, Lauren. They were beautiful. "You look free." "I am," I said. "I always knew you would be." We talked for a while about nothing and everything. He was seeing someone new and I was happy for him. It didn't hurt like I'd feared it would. It just felt distant, like a chapter closed gently. After the call, I went back to my camera. The lens was dusty, but my hands still remembered how to hold it. I took a picture of my reflection again, not posed, not framed perfectly, just real. The kind of photo you don't edit. When I looked at the screen, I saw something I hadn't seen in years. Joy. Small, quiet joy, but real. A week later, I opened a small photography workshop downtown. The first day, 10 students showed up, men and women of all ages, each carrying their own stories. I started the class with a single sentence. "Photography isn't about capturing beauty," I said. "It's about capturing truth and learning to survive it." They nodded, some smiling, some already tearing up. And for the first time, I felt like I was giving back the thing that had saved me. That evening, I closed up the studio and walked home through the golden haze of sunset. The city was glowing, the world alive again. When I reached my apartment, I found another envelope taped to my door. My name written in familiar handwriting. For a second, I almost didn't open it. But curiosity won. Inside was a card. No long letter this time. Just one line. "You were never too much." I was just too small to see it. It wasn't signed, but I didn't need a name. I stood there for a long time, the city humming quietly behind me. Then I smiled, folded the note, and slipped it into my camera case. That night, I sat on the balcony again, glass of wine in hand, watching the lights shimmer on the lake. I whispered to the wind, "This is what peace feels like." It wasn't loud or triumphant. It was slow, soft, like forgiveness, whispered into the dark. Somewhere below, a couple laughed, the sound echoing up toward me. A car horn blared, a dog barked, the city kept living. And so did I. If you've ever been betrayed, if you've ever had to rebuild yourself from ashes, then you know revenge fades but truth stays. Healing doesn't mean forgetting. It means finally recognizing your own light when no one else will. So tell me, where are you watching from? Have you ever had to fight for your own peace, your own glow? Because if you have, then you already know no one can steal it from you again.